disturbing true stories of being home alone. 1. Hearing voices in the night. One evening, I was home alone in the 2-story house I shared with my sister. It was a mother-daughter layout, meaning it had 2 separate kitchens. My sister mostly used the downstairs space, and I had the upstairs to myself. Since she often stayed at her boyfriend's place, I was usually alone at night. At 30 years old, I felt a bit silly getting spooked by this, but sometimes I would. Especially that night when I was watching a horror movie in the dark. Her upstairs layout is open, so the living room, dining area, and kitchen are all connected. Meaning when I sat on the couch, I couldn't see the space behind me. The only light came from the TV, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling uneasy for some reason. When the movie ended, I got up, brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights, and went to bed. A couple of hours later, around 1 a.m., I woke up, groggy and confused, and then I heard my sister's voice downstairs. It sounded like she was already inside the house, not calling for me to let her in. At first, I thought she was with her boyfriend or maybe calling out to me. Her voice was so real, I got out of bed, turned on the hallway light, and walked toward the sound, calling out, "What's up?" as I headed downstairs in the dark. I found the switch for the foyer light, but the area was empty. I walked into her bedroom, where I knew I'd heard her voice. When I called out again, there was no answer. I'd swear I heard something drop onto the floor. Nervous, I headed back upstairs to my room and tried calling her, but there was no answer. I convinced myself I'd imagined it and locked myself in my room. The next day, I texted her, asking if she'd been home or called me. She told me she'd stayed at her boyfriend's that night, leaving me to wonder if it was all in my head or something far more unsettling, too. The man on the deck. I was about 14 and home alone one night when my mom, a nurse, was working an overnight shift. My brother was at college and I had invited a girl I was talking to over. After she left, I went back to watching TV in my bedroom, which was upstairs facing the backyard. I was in bed when I heard the sound of someone moving a chair outside on her deck. Thinking it might be her returning, I looked out the window and saw a man sitting there in the dark, looking right at me. I ducked away, hoping he hadn't seen me. Terrified, I texted a few friends, but they all said it wasn't them. I peeked out the window again, and there he was, staring up at me with his shoulders shaking like he was laughing, but there was no sound. I called out, "What do you want?" Just laughed harder, a strange whizzing sound wheezing out of him. He tried both the back and front doors, rattling them, but luckily they were locked. I spent the night hiding, scared out of my mind, waiting for my mom to get home. 3. A robbery gone terribly wrong. When I was 10, I was left home alone because my older brother had been hit by a car, and my parents rushed to the hospital. They took my little sister, but I stayed home. I was playing a video game when I heard the front door open. I figured my parents were back, but got suspicious when I didn't hear anyone upstairs. I crept over to look and saw 3 people standing in the living room, strangers. I quickly closed my bedroom door, but it clicked too loudly. Terrified, I hid in my closet and listened as they came and checked my bed, and even opened the closet. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. They left eventually, taking valuables with them. I was lucky that night. I knew it then, and I know it now. 4. Voice from the woods. I was 16, and my parents had gone on a rare vacation, leaving me alone. I was out on the deck, listening to music, when I heard someone in the woods calling out, "Hey, over here." Thinking it was just kids, I ignored it. Then I heard it again, closer this time, and the voice said, "We need help." Now I was suspicious. I called out, and the voice replied, "Come here. I see you." I was halfway to the woods when I suddenly felt this gut instinct to turn back. I didn't feel safe. Back in the house, I heard the voice again right outside and a loud bang on my window. I screamed that I'd called the police. Thankfully, the person left, but I never felt safe in that house again. 5. The woman in the window. Once when I was home alone, I glanced up at the second-story window and saw a woman I didn't recognize standing there. Rushed inside to check, searching every room, but found no one. I told my neighbor, who came over to help me look, but we found nothing. Later that night, just as I was finally drifting off to sleep, I felt something moving under my bed. When I looked, there was that same woman creeping out from beneath. I screamed, tackled her, and struggled until my neighbor, hearing the noise, came to help. The police arrive and recognize her as a local troublemaker. It was a night I'll never forget. 3 disturbing true basement horror stories. 1. The strange behavior of Cosmo growing up. Our cat Cosmo always slept in the basement. Every night, my parents would scoop him up from wherever he was lounging and carry him down there. They hated the cat hair he'd leave on their bed. The basement was the biggest room in the house, so we always figured he enjoyed the space. But a couple of weeks ago, he started acting strange. Normally, we'd sit him down at the top of the basement stairs and he'd walk right down. One night, after I put him down as usual, I heard him meowing at the top of the stairs. Something he never did. When I opened the door, he bolted past me, running out into the living room like he was chasing something. Over the next couple of nights, he'd linger at the top of the stairs, meowing until someone came. Eventually, I just ignored him, figuring he'd go down on his own. Then one day, he refused to come inside. He just sat curled up on the doormat. I had to pick him up and carry him in, letting him sleep in my room instead. For a few days of this, my dad started getting annoyed, blaming us for leaving the basement door open and letting the cool air escape. I figured it was my sister leaving the door open as she's known to do. Just glad Cosmo seemed calmer sleeping in my room. Then one night, I woke up and glanced over at my door, where I saw a dark silhouette just standing there, perfectly still. Assuming it was my sister, I called out, but the figure didn't respond and eventually moved away. Too tired to investigate, I just went back to sleep. A couple of days later, we discovered the reason Cosmo had been avoiding the basement, a flea infestation. The whole basement was crawling with them. My dad cleaned the place top to bottom, fumigating and scrubbing every inch, and told us to avoid the area for a few days. A few nights later, though, I noticed a light flickering outside my bedroom door. It looked like someone was playing with the switch in the hall. I convinced myself it was just my dad using the bathroom, but it went on long enough to make me uneasy. I lay there, frozen, hoping it would stop. Eventually, it did, but I had never felt so tense in my life. Once my dad gave the all clear on the basement, I went back down, hoping to play some video games. But as soon as I got down there, I noticed something was wrong. The fleas were still there somehow after all the cleaning. They'd persisted. My dad said they'd die off on their own soon, but it did not make sense. The next day, I decided to investigate. Went to the back of the basement to a small storage room where we kept old boxes and tools. The moment I stepped in, I was hit with the foul smell of decay. There is an unfinished crawl space in the back where the smell was coming from, but it was too dark to see anything inside. I turned to grab a flashlight, and that is when I heard it breathing. It was soft but steady, like someone hiding just beyond my view. I froze as the breathing grew louder, and then something lunged toward me from the darkness. I barely glimpsed a hand reaching for me before I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. When the police came, they found food wrappers and empty chip bags stuffed into the crawl space, but no sign of whoever had been hiding there. They said it was probably a homeless person who had slipped in through the storm door for shelter. Ever since that night, we keep the basement door locked, and Cosmo has never gone near it again, too. The masked stranger in the basement when I was around 7. My parents would transform our basement into a haunted house every Halloween to raise donations for the food bank. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers would come, donating food as an entrance fee. We had cobwebs, strobe lights, spooky masks, nothing too fancy, but it was always a hit. My cousins would come down to help, dressing up in creepy costumes to jump out and scare people. One year, a strange man showed up before the event really started. He said he wanted to drop off food early as his wife and daughter would join later. My parents thanked him and took the cans, thinking nothing of it. That night, one of my friends ran up to me in tears, saying that someone in an anonymous mask had grabbed her wrist and tried to pull her into a closet. I figured it was one of my cousins, but the look on her face told me otherwise. My parents went down to investigate, and after rounding everyone up, they realized one of my cousins, Eric, was missing his mask. He thought someone had taken it as a joke when he stepped away. Alarmed, my parents shut down the haunted house and called the police. Nothing else happened that night, but I was still spooked. Later, I was woken by a soft knocking on my bedroom window. I lay there, hoping it would stop, but then I heard scratching. Summoning my courage, I threw back the covers and looked outside. only to see a person in the same anonymous mask staring back at me inches from the glass. I screamed and my parents rushed in, but by then the figure was gone. Months later, I came home to find an anonymous mask lying on my bed. Written across the forehead in black Sharpie was my name. We called the police again, but nothing came of it. My parents ramped up security, adding cameras and sensors to every window. Although nothing happened after that, I was too terrified to sleep in my own room. And the feeling still haunts me. 3. The Aan Secret. I recently got a job at a Mexican restaurant in a rougher part of town. And although the area was sketchy, I needed the money. My manager, Carlos, was not exactly a comforting presence. He was the type who felt shady from day one, giving me the worst shifts and ignoring rules. One night, as I was closing, I started hearing odd sounds like faint thudding and scraping, coming from below the kitchen floor. At first, I brushed it off, but when it kept happening, I asked Carlos about it. He told me not to worry and claimed the restaurant did not even have a basement. But I knew he was lying. I had seen window wells at the back of the building. When I brought it up again, he gave me this cold, firm look and insisted there was no basement, that it had been sealed years ago. His reaction unsettled me, but I did not push it further. For days, I kept hearing noises at closing, and one night, curiosity got the best of me. I went to the window wells outside and tried to peer inside, but it was pitch black. Just as I was about to leave, a light flickered on, then went out. But not before I saw a glimpse of someone's face pressed right against the glass. The face belonged to a man who looked wild and unkempt with yellowed eyes and a disturbing grin. He banged his head against the window, his crazed smile sending chills down my spine. I backed away, rushing to my car, too terrified to go back inside. The next day, I confronted Carlos, who, to my shock, admitted everything. He confessed that his mentally ill brother had been living in the basement. Carlos had been hiding him down there, afraid of what might happen if people found out. He begged me to keep quiet. I was horrified but needed the job, so I stayed until one night as I was leaving. I heard footsteps following me. I looked back to see his brother hobbling toward me from the tree line, a crazed look in his eyes. I barely made it to my car before he reached me, slamming his face against the window, smearing dirt and sweat across the glass. I sped off, calling the police as soon as I got home. That was my last shift there. I still do not know what happened to Carlos, his brother, or the restaurant, and I plan to keep it that way.